Okay, so this is a podcast about rebellions. So I'm going to do 3 rebellions in this podcast. I'm going to do the Northern Rebellion, the Ridolfi Plot, and I'm also going to do the Essex Rebellion as well, okay? So listen carefully to what I say here because you could get asked about all of these or one of these, so you need to know them. So the Northern Rebellion was the first rebellion against Elizabeth I, and this was in 1569. So one major figure who rebelled against Elizabeth I was the Duke of Norfolk. And he was a major Catholic landowner, and as we know, a lot of people in the north still wanted to be Catholic, so he did have quite a lot of support. Now, the Catholics would really have liked Mary Queen of Scots to be on the throne. So the plan here was that the Duke of Norfolk would marry Mary Queen of Scots, then he would become King of England and Elizabeth would be taken off the throne. That was the plan. So Elizabeth had kept Mary under house arrest as soon as she arrived in England in 1568. But now she became much more dangerous because Mary was actually in the country, where before, she'd been in Scotland. So when Elizabeth refused for Norfolk to marry Mary Queen of Scots, because obviously that would have been a disaster for her, he just upped and left. So he didn't ask the permission of Queen Elizabeth I, he just left and travelled north, okay? Now this was a major problem because that in itself is treason really, just going somewhere without, the Queen's permission. So a group of northern lords started to put a rebellion together, and the 2 lords were Westmoreland and Northumberland. So these 2 lords were planning to help Norfolk to become King of England and for him to marry Mary Queen of Scots. So to annoy Elizabeth, what they did was they celebrated a Catholic Mass in Durham Cathedral, which is exactly what she wouldn't wanted them to do. And then 4,600 men were got together and they started to march south towards London. Okay, so now she was under threat. Now, unfortunately for Elizabeth, it took a little while for her to get some lords to help her to stop this rebellion from happening. But it was stopped, and then what happened was all of these people who'd been involved just disbanded. Now, what happened was the Earl of Sussex, and you'll hear a little bit more about him later because his son was Essex, who rebelled against her in 1601. What happened was he'd helped her and saved her by raising an army to get rid of these 4,600 men. Now, the leaders of the rebellion fled, okay, and basically Northumberland was captured and executed and Westmoreland died in poverty, but she refused to kill the Duke of Norfolk for this, so he was just imprisoned in the Tower, but he wasn't actually executed for this rebellion. So this first rebellion failed, and partly it failed because she was meant to be excommunicated by the Pope in 1569, but the Pope didn't do that in that year. He ended up being issued a bit later, the papal bull in 1570. So I'm sure that would have given a bit more weight to it if it had been done in the same year. Okay, the next one then. This was 2 years later in 1571, and this was the Ridolfi Plot. And the main idea behind this was yet again that the Duke of Norfolk would marry Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth would be taken off the throne. So it's similar to the first, but this time there would be a northern rebellion at the same time as there was a foreign invasion from the Catholics to help, obviously, the Duke of Norfolk and Mary to rule England. So here goes, these are the key things. Norfolk spent 10 months in the Tower of London, and when he was released he was put under house arrest, so he was being monitored closely. Now, he quickly became involved in another plot though, this Ridolfi Plot. And Ridolfi was just a Catholic banker from Florence. He wasn't like, anybody special, and this is why this was important. Because he was so sort of, under the radar in terms of him being a Catholic banker, he could go around Europe and gain support. He believed, though, that foreign support was needed for the rebellion to actually succeed. And because in 1570 the Pope had commanded that all Catholics disobey Elizabeth because he'd excommunicated her, this gave a real chance for something to actually, happen and take place here. So Ridolfi travelled freely across Europe and, as I said, gained support. And the plan was for the Netherlands to invade England at the same time as there was a northern rebellion. So basically she would face a war on 2 fronts. Elizabeth would be murdered and replaced by Mary Queen of Scots, and she would obviously marry Norfolk. But Elizabeth's spies, obviously led by Walsingham, found something that was very interesting to them when they were looking into this plot. They found some coded coins, and then they happened to find the code on the coins to how to crack the code underneath the doormat of the Duke of Norfolk. So he was caught red-handed at being involved in this plot. So yes, you guessed it, this time she did have him executed in 1572 because she knew now he was an enemy that really she couldn't manage to control. So for the final rebellion, this is something that hurt Elizabeth I the most. She understood that the Catholics would plot against her. She totally got that they weren't going to be happy with her. But the thing that she really resented was the Essex Rebellion, because the Earl of Essex had been given absolutely every chance in the Elizabethan court. He was one of the court favourites. So this had nothing to do with religion. This had just things to do with, power and position, really. So this happened in 1601. So Elizabeth I was 68 years old, and this is a really old age for somebody in those days. But what it did show is she was still able to, act swiftly and put a rebellion down, even in her old age. But what it also showed was that people now, because she was getting older, were trying to take advantage of that as well. So this is what happened. He was one of her court favourites, and he was nothing to do with the Catholics at all. He was a Protestant. And he had a place on the Privy Council. She'd given him a sweet wine monopoly, so any sweet wine that came into the country, that tax that was paid on that was paid to him. And he was given all the opportunities anybody could wish for. But Essex developed a rivalry with Robert Cecil, who was the son of William Cecil, who'd been a Secretary of State and one of her most trusted advisors. So in 1598, he became involved in an argument during a Privy Council meeting with Elizabeth I over Ireland. And then what he did was he decided to draw his sword on her. Now, this is unbelievable. This is like execution offence, like straight away. But because he was one of her favourites, she told him to go home and she had him put under house arrest. Now, the reason he'd drawn the sword was Elizabeth had just, lashed out at him and hit him across the head. But still, there was no reason that he should be doing that, drawing the sword on the Queen of England. So what happened was he was put under house arrest. And then she made him Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. Now, she knew this was a really difficult position. So in 1599, she sent him to Ireland to basically absolutely put down a rebellion there and show no mercy on them. Now, unfortunately, he was told to crush the rebellion, but actually ended up signing a truce with the leader of the rebellion. So what he did was he totally disobeyed her order and he made peace with them. And he also started awarding, the generals and people who'd gone out there with him, oh, well done, haven't you done well? But actually, that was not what she'd asked him to do, so she was absolutely furious. So when he heard this, he rushed back to try and speak to her. But unfortunately, what happened was he rushed in and she didn't have a wig on, so she felt totally humiliated. So that was just something else where he'd overstepped the mark. So she was so cross about this, she basically said, right, I've absolutely had enough. So she took away his sweet wine monopoly, so that meant he became in a lot of debt, so that became a huge problem for him. So when he felt he had nothing left to lose, because his position in court had completely gone, he thought, right, well, the last thing I'm going to try and do is I'm going to bring down Robert Cecil. So that was his plan. So what he did was, in February 1601, he tried to gather supporters. So he went round trying to gather support. Now, bearing in mind she'd won the Spanish Armada in 1588 and was actually a very well-liked queen, this is going to be difficult. So he got a small group of supporters and then he arrested 4 members of the Privy Council. Now, I know this sounds absolutely ridiculous, but he actually took them to his house to hide them, so it was obvious, where they were going to be. So Robert Cecil did a very clever thing. He told the Queen about this and basically put out the word that he'd committed treason against the King, against the Queen. So because that had come out that he committed treason, everybody knew then who were the supporters, oh, we could be executed for this. So the supporters started to just, move away and leave the Essex Rebellion. And also she told Cecil to get the cannons out the tower and face them at the house, because she said this will get them out. So she got them put in front of the house and he absolutely realised that he was lost. There was absolutely no way he was going to be able to do anything. So the Essex Rebellion totally failed, and she showed that she acted decisively even in her old age. And then what happened was Essex was arrested and he was executed privately, but only on the condition that he gave up the names of other people who were involved in the rebellion. And he was such a nice guy, he said that his sister was involved in the rebellion as well. So all of that just to get, a private execution. So in terms of the Essex Rebellion, it's the one that is the most unusual rebellion really, because it wasn't by a Catholic, and it was by one of her favourites. And Elizabeth understandably felt a bit depressed and betrayed about this rebellion.